Hey everybody, it's Jack with Future Pastimes. This is Battle Language. We're going to have a round table discussion on some aspect of the Dune board game, as you can see here. And I'm joined by some Dune players who have recently become playtesters with Future Pastimes. So they're helping us out with all of our Dune endeavors, such as they are. So we have Mr. Nobody, who's been on before. We've got Dirty Mike, and we've got Boy R Dummy, and
Hey, hey.
not their real names, I presume. Um,
Yeah.
but uh, uh, but yes, we are all pretty much certifiable Dune fanatics, and the topic of our discussion for this episode is all about Storm Order. And if you're not familiar with that, I'm not sure why you're watching this video, but Storm Order has to do with the player order, and it's based on the storm. And the way that it works is it's based on whose faction marker the storm is closest to without being on or past. And it's hard to explain sometimes, so it's nice if you got a visual. So if this were our game setup where we have Guild and the BG, Emperor, Fremen, and Atreides, nobody in the sixth spot, for some reason we're playing at the less optimal 5-player count. If the storm is here, the Guild is going to be the first player in Storm Order. So for any phase that has a a turn order, and not every phase does, um, this will be the player who goes first, and then it will go counterclockwise from that player. So in a couple of ways, this is quite a bit different from how most games do things. Especially in modern board gaming, a lot of times what will happen is the first player will rotate naturally at the end of each round. But here, the player order is determined by the storm, and the storm typically moves up to 6 sectors each round. Now, in basic, it's going to move 2 to 6 sectors because the movement is determined by 2 players dialing a number on their battle wheels. And after the first placement of the storm, they're going to be dialing a 1, 2, or a 3. And then those 2 players will reveal simultaneously what, and you'll move them the sum. So in this case, if we both dial 2, we'd go 1, 2, 3, 4. And here the turn order has changed a little bit. So Atreides, since the storm is on their player marker, their faction marker, they would be last, not first, because the storm is not approaching them, it's already at them. Fremen would be first, and Atreides would be last in this case. Now, if you're playing advanced and the Fremen are in the game, they've got the Storm deck, which has 6 cards, and they're numbered 1 to 6. So here, you could have a situation where the Storm only goes 1 sector. So if that were the case, then in this next round, the Fremen are first again. And if it randomly goes, we say we shuffle it up, and hey, it moved 1 again, well, that's its 3. The Fremen would be first again, which can be brutal. It's sometimes, in fact, most of the time, you don't necessarily want to go first. Doesn't really afford you much of an advantage in the bidding round, and shipping and movement, you find you are vulnerable to what the other players do because they are benefiting from seeing what you do. If you want to go to a stronghold, they already know how much strength you've got there, so if they can bring more strength, they're able to do so. Or if you're at a spice blow, same thing. The battles also done in order, and again, going first is not an advantage in the battles because if you're going later in that round or in that phase, you get to benefit of potentially seeing cards that people have, people who win a battle. If you see the Fremen fighting a couple of battles first, if they manage to win them and they're like, all right, they've got a crysknife and they've got a snooper, so I need to have a shield or I need to have poison, or if I don't have those things, maybe I'm playing my weakest leader because I'm not going to contribute much from leader strength there. Maybe I have to dial more. So those are the things that go on. So let me check in now with the panel, and let's talk a little bit about. This is a fairly unique system. There's not a lot of other games that have this. So what do we think of this system? What are some ways that you feel that it affects the game, and whatever else do you want to talk about when it comes to Storm Order? So let's open it up.
Mike, you had
I
some
think I,
thoughts.
oh, go ahead.
Now, I was gonna say you had some thoughts, I guess, kind of leading up to this. Why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, so I guess the one thing when I first played this game, I had never played a game like that where kind of rotating turn order, how you had mentioned it, where usually, like I said, it's kind of randomized and it rotates around. I never played a game where turn order was decided by the actual game board. Um, and I think when I first played it, everything was very complicated, and you're trying to figure out what you want to do. And then I noticed when we had to storm dial after the fights were over, I thought, oh my gosh, there's even more things to think about because I got to know if I want to go first or go last. I got to decide if I want to kill those forces that I have sadly sitting out in front of the storm. What's my opponent going to dial? I felt like this system was really, really unique and very deep. Even though at times it can be pretty obvious what people are going to do, there are times where the decision making for even turn order is incredibly um, nuanced.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
What's interesting about that, too, that you bring up is, at the start of a game, whether you're playing basic or advanced, the two people who are on either side of the storm start. So the storm's going to start here, but that's not where it is in the first round necessarily. So in this case, where we have the Bene Gesserit here, nobody on this spot, but then we have the guild. So those two factions would each dial any number on the wheel, and the wheel goes from 0 to 20. And so they're dialing any number they want. And then again, you're revealing simultaneously, and that way the starting position of the storm for the first round of the game is going to be utterly random. Nobody knows, and you're not allowed to make a deal about, hey, why don't we have the storm start, over Carthag? You can't do that in that first storm placement. However, if you're playing in the basic rules, or if you're playing in a game that doesn't have the Fremen, then you are using these wheels to dial a 1, 2, or 3. And again, that's determined by who handled the wheels last. So if there were battles in the previous round, the last battle, those are the players who are going to be dialing. And if for some reason there are no battles in the second turn, it would be the Bene Gesserit and the Guild. They were the last two people to handle the wheels. So they would be the ones dialing. But they can make a deal. So if the storm is here, and they know that it's going to go 2 to 6, so it can't stop here in this sector over Carthag, but it could stop over Tabor. So they can say, all right, I'm the guild. Let's block Tabor with the storm. I'll dial a 1, you dial a 3, and then, boom, 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 the storm is going to be there in round 2 or whichever round you're in. And this means that it's going to be harder for somebody to try to win the game. Nobody can do a thing where they land, they ship into Carthage and move into Tabor to get into 2. It'll be, it's certainly not impossible. There's still 4 strongholds, and you only need 3 if you're going solo. But that fact that you can make that deal is an interesting, and I think it's an underrated element of the storm movement, and it changes the player order, and it can be a big deal again about who's going to be going first or last. With 2 people dialing it, you're much more likely to get a 6 and really scoot it along. And when you've got forces out there in the sand, especially if they're not your forces that you're dialing, you're like, yeah, let's get them. But then you have deals where someone is like, look, I'll give you 2 spice if you just dial a 1. And you dial a thing, and maybe I have forces and I want to trap there. So a lot of, like you said, some nuance and a lot of interesting gameplay that's added in there with that. But you don't see it all the time. And if the Fremen are in and you're playing advanced, it's just going to be random. The Fremen will know, and that's interesting, but they don't have to tell anybody. They can certainly try to get somebody to pay them for that information. But yeah, what do you guys? How do you feel about that? And which do you prefer? Do you have a preference one way or the other?
I mean, I think because I have seen people play with the Storm deck whenever the Fremen aren't in it. I personally like it better to only use it when the Fremen are in it. Number one, it kind of feels like, a Fremen thing, and it's kind of weird to like, use one of their elements, without them. But two, I do kind of like the fact that like the last players that battled or last 2 factions that battled have some kind of control over how far the storm is going to go. So, for example, if the Bene Gesserit was like one of the last ones in battle, they might be incentivized to push it at least 3 because they want to be last in the storm order, for example.
Mhm.
And you had actually said something earlier, Jack, about in most situations you kind of want to go later. The only time uh, that it is to your advantage to be first in the storm order, or I shouldn't say the only time, but one of the big advantages is if you're kind of fortifying like an already strong position, because one of the advantages of going first in the storm order is that you break ties. So for example, in this case, every battle that the Bene Gesserit is in is if the dial and the leader totals are equal, they're going to win all of those battles. So while it is to everyone's advantage after them to kind of see like where everybody else is going, it is kind of worth knowing that like if you are first in Stormwater, it even though they technically call it the aggressor in the rule book, it's almost like you're the fortified defender, I guess, like an actual practical concept in a lot of ways. Um, so like if you have a strong position on the board, don't be scared to fortify it because it forces people that want to come in and attack you to have to like exceed whatever they think your total could possibly be.
Yeah, and that's a good point. This notion of the aggressor, because it's something, again, it's another one of the many multitude of nuances of the game, and something that not everybody fully understands. So when we say the aggressor, we it's just a fancy way to say that you are closest to being first in storm order if you are not in fact first in storm order, and that's important for a couple of things. One, if let's say that this is the order here. So if Bene Gesserit are first in storm order, but let's say they've got nobody on the map, or they're in the polar sink, or they're just not in any battles. We're going to check to see if they have battles first when we get to the battle phase. If not, then we go to the next player. This player is now considered the aggressor, so they get to, if they are in multiple battles, they're going to decide the order of the battles that they're in. So if they're in a battle in Carthage and one in Tuic Siege, they decide which of those battles they want to fight first. The other thing about being the aggressor is if you are in a tie, the tie goes to the aggressor. So the tie goes to whoever is first in player order, in storm order. Not necessarily who was the attacker. So let's say that the Harkonnen were in Tuix and the guild jump in there, or let's say the guild are there well, no, that's fine. The Harkonnen are there, the guild come in. It doesn't mean that the guild are the aggressor just because they're the ones that invaded this stronghold while the Harkonnens were there first. I've played with a lot of people who think that is the case. The aggressor is whoever came in after somebody was already there, and in a like a spice blow, everybody could be there, and it's a matter of, are we trying to keep track of who went in? I guess that would again be determined by storm order, but yeah, it's somebody may have been there already from a previous round, and so that is what the aggressor is purely determined by order of play, and if you're first up in the storm order, you're the aggressor, and then if your battles are done or you didn't have any, it's the next player, and so on and so on. So in this case, the emperor would never be considered the aggressor and would not win any ties because they are last in storm order. So that is a good point. The order in which going, because battles are often won by very little margin, 1 point, 2 point, and not an insignificant number of battles are won by no margin. It's just who was the aggressor, and a lot of people they factor that when they're looking at what am I dialing or what leader am I going to play. I just have to tie the other player if I am first in storm order. I don't have to do any better than that. And I don't necessarily want to lose any more forces or risk a higher strength leader or whatever the case may be, if I can avoid it. So just dialing, max dialing or going hog wild when you don't need to is very wasteful. And Dune is not a very forgiving game when you pay more than you should for anything.
Do you guys think that if they change the terminology from aggressor to defender, it would be like a little easier to, I guess, I don't know, kind of get it, under your fingers, so to
I
say?
think you'd probably have the opposite problem with, like, if it's the defender, it's like, all right, was I here first? But that doesn't matter if storm order is determined otherwise, because again, you could have been there. You could have been there already from a much earlier round, and somebody is coming in, and but you're before them in storm order, and so you're the defender. but also the aggressor. And so I
Nice.
think I think aggressor is a word that probably should be changed, but to something that is less evocative of what is physically occurring in the battle. And maybe it's just as simple as, you just try to link it back to storm order in some way so that it's easier to remember that's the important part. It's the storm order that determines these things, not
Yeah.
not any kind of map presence or order in which actions were taken necessarily,
Mhm.
because they're not always completely synced up that way.
That's true. I mean, you could use something as like who has favor, right? So it's like, and then it's literally tracked just by the storm order, right? And then all you have to do is just look at the position of the storm order. Because everything you're saying is I've had the same thing, and it's like, wait a minute, how can you be the aggressor if I'm the one that like chipped in to attack you, right?
Hmm.
People are just like, how does this make sense? Like this doesn't like in no other game does this, does this happen quite like this?
I think the other thing, in case people ever got bored of the six possible outcomes of how much the storm could move, there is the added assurance of the weather control card. I think that always keeps it fresh. Tradies may or may not see that, but that's another way to really just shake up the storm order, and just kind of cause some unexpected surprises, especially when paired with family atomics. That's always a disaster. But I love the weather control card, especially if I'm always down on my luck and I can really kind of navigate it just perfectly to where I can maybe be last and maybe go for some spice that people are busy fighting other strongholds to go pick up. I think it's an underrated card.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think that the weather control has a lot of really fun effects. I mean, the Family Atomics one is like probably the classic example, like that and the laser gun shield explosion are just two examples of just how quickly things can really turn on their head in this game.
Right.
But no, I think you're right. I mean, you can use it to, you know, depending on how far the storm is away, you can protect your guys in strongholds. If you have a small
Yep.
stack, you can, make yourself, the aggressor. If you're like, you know what, I want to go for a win, or I think, my alliance should go for a win. Or it's like you had suggested, you can make yourself go last and kind of see like, okay, well, no one's really going for that spice blow, but maybe here's an open stronghold, or maybe guild only has a couple troops, or better example would be like Harkonnen only has three or four guys, and you're like, I think I could beat them. I got a pretty good hand, and I know maybe one or two safe leaders, so I'll kind of hedge my bets, in that direction. So no, I
Right.
like it, and I think that card doesn't get talked about quite enough.
I like that it has a nice range too, and
Yeah.
you up to 10 sectors. But I also like the fact that it can go zero. You can be like, you know what? I like it
Yeah.
right where it is,
Right.
especially if you've got forces in a stronghold that the storm is covering, and you were like, all right, this was a good time for me to make my move, but maybe you didn't quite get it, so you're like, all right, I got one more round where nobody can come in here and mess with me, and maybe you only have like one force there, so that's it's really nice to just keep them safe from external influence, and then use your rest of your forces to try to get things done. Yeah, the and what's interesting, you were mentioning before about the moniker of aggressor, is we did change that in Dune Conquest. It's just called battle advantage. So it's, if
Mm.
you have battle advantage if you are the first player, and or you're going after that first player. Once they're done, then the next player in turn order has battle advantage, and they pick the order of battles. They win ties. So yeah, it was just again, it's more of a neutral term to help remember that. And that's a game where storm order is not used. It is just a rotating. I've got the first player marker, and then it's going to rotate clockwise. I think that one goes clockwise to the next player. It might go counterclockwise. I don't remember. It's funny, but like in my household, we've gotten in the habit of saying clockwise or storm order. That is just a term that we use
Uh,
for counterclockwise.
that's funny.
So it's I caught my daughter saying it one time, and I was like, "Oh, you are the best." So yeah, which way are we doing this? we're going in storm order. All right, excellent. Everyone else is like, what are you talking about?
Yeah,
Let me
one
ask
thing
you,
that
gentlemen, this.
oh,
No, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, well, just like how Mike was saying earlier, where kind of learning about the storm order the first time and just how it really expands like the amount of things just to think about in the game. I think one of the underrated things about the Storm Order is the bidding advantage and how that works, especially at the start of the game where you know the amount of spice that everybody has. It's like, well, the Atreides, they have a decent starting spice level, and the Fremen don't. So, right off the bat, Atreides could just bid 3 spice and just immediately count the Fremen out of it, right? Um, versus, the Emperor, maybe they kind of want to start off with a pretty decent bid to deter everybody else, and they get the card, and then it just allows them to get more spice the second, third, fourth card, and then they're back in bidding on card number 5 and 6. Um, I like to at the start of the game just really try to pay attention to the amount of starting spice that other people have, and just think about the amount of spice that they'd be. How much would I be willing to bid if I was in their shoes?
Yeah. Let me piggyback because this actually kind of ties in what I was going to ask, which is, does storm position and storm order factor at all for you guys when you're looking at alliances? Because I know typically, you look at like alliance powers or maybe troops on the board. But does the storm order ever factor into that at all?
I think for players who have a high capacity for detail and things like that, they definitely are paying attention to that. I have to keep reminding myself about how important that is. It's when Moritani is in the game that it is much more starkly in my mind because of their enemy of my enemy advantage. So if they have a terror token face down somewhere, if somebody moves into that stronghold, instead of revealing it, they can try to form an alliance with that faction. And if it's somebody who's going late in the turn order, especially a strong faction like, the Harkonnen or the Emperor, they're in a good position. They're in 2 strongholds already. If they're going to be going late, that's important all by itself. Anytime a really strong faction is going late, it's up to the other factions going earlier to try to maybe block the strongholds. So that's going to be important. But I know with Moritani, if someone is able to form that alliance and nobody is going to be going after them that can do anything about it, that can be a real problem for the rest of the table. But yeah, I mean, I think even when you're looking at forming an alliance with somebody, the storm order should be considered, especially if there's not an obvious connection. Like, all right, if you're in a game with Atreides and Bene Gesserit, where that seems to be a fairly magnetic alliance thing, unless something has gone awry for one of those 2 factions, that's a pretty strong indicator. But let's say Atreides has no cards, and the Emperor is saying, let's form an alliance. Atreides might be like, yeah, the voice is not going to do me any good if I can't buy a bunch of cards, and I could fill my hand by forming an alliance there. But if apart from those sorts of obvious advantages that you might be getting, it's looking at, all right, who's in how many strongholds. That's going to be a factor. But then right on its heels, I think should be storm order, because it might be a matter of how well do we think we can win if we go for it this round? If we don't, is it going to get easier or harder for us if we go later? And what about another alliance or another set of factions? If they're going before us, or if they're definitely going after us, or if it's kind of a split, like one will go before, one will go after. What kind of
Yeah,
impact can that have on there? How easy is it if we're going late, like if it's all right, the Emperor and the Fremen are like, let's form an alliance. Are the other 4 factions going to just be easy to like, yeah, let's just block these strongholds? There's no way they can win because of how early we get to go in the turn
sure.
order. and you might like, you know what, maybe the Fremen, maybe, Bene Gesserit might be a better alliance, or maybe the Guild, who can go whenever they want if you're playing in advance. So
Right.
that should be something that you can count in. If there's not already an obvious reason, if you're weighing whether, one, to even get into an alliance, or two, a choice between a couple of players, use the storm as a way to help you to make that decision.
Sure. No, that's fair because I mean, like for example, if we back the storm up to here, now all of a sudden the Emperor BG, like if these two ally, especially if they have like any forces on the board, that could be really scary because now they essentially get like full reign to go wherever suits them, and the rest of the factions have to react to whatever they do. I mean, obviously Guild is the exception, but all things considered equal, I mean, this really would give this alliance a tremendous amount of power as opposed to if it was here. Because now everything that you just said about the Fremen and the Emperor Alliance now applies to these two. Because just like, well, the rest of the table could just decide, maybe we just don't want to let these guys play ball for this turn and kind of clog everything up.
Yeah. Another thing to keep in mind is, like in this example again, if you've got a situation here where the last two factions to go in this example are going to be the Fremen and the Atreides, and let's say they're in a couple of strongholds, but with like one force each, just not very strong, what's going to happen is, if the Emperor is like, yeah, I'm going in fat on this one right here, the Fremen can't get out so that somebody else can fight them because they're going so late. They're just like,
Yeah.
we can't get a stronger player to challenge them there. So this is not a good situation. And the Atreides are like, we're not even in a much better situation. So if a bunch of Bene Gesserit come there, or if the Emperor is like, I'm going down and I'm bringing in half of them here and half of them there.
Yeah.
So you're like,
Yeah.
you're like, all right, I'll do what I can, but I may not be able to bring a lot to bear here, and they may know that the reason that they're so low here is because they have so many of their forces in the tanks. So there's not much reserve left to challenge them. So that would be a very compelling reason for the Emperor to form an alliance with one of these earlier factions, just to be able to take advantage of that.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. I've definitely done that before, where I'm earlier in Storm Order, I have tried to pick on a weaker faction that I know is going second to last or absolute last in Storm Order, since that basically Stronghold blocks yourself in a really good position. They either stay there and you have a most likely a favorable battle, or they move out and you get an uncontested Stronghold. Especially if they just came off a lost fight in the previous turn, or maybe they got traitor called on them. I think there's definitely some benefits to knowing when a weak faction is going last if you are kind of disadvantaged to go first in Storm Order.
Yeah. I mean, if they're going last, all they can do is run away. And if they're going first, then they're stuck. They're just like, if I don't get out of here now, then somebody's got my number. And so Storm Order is it's a really critical element of the game, and it can really change up a lot of what players can and should do in any given situation. Like if you're like, all right, if the storm is here, a certain reality is true. And here it might be completely different. And that's just the matter of, I was going first, now I'm going last, and that changes up so many things that we couldn't predict that was going to be. We're like, oh, I thought there was a much greater chance that storm was going to move past here. But or if it was only if it was over in this sector and it only moved one, and you're like, oh no, I'm still first. This is terrible. I was really hoping to go later.
Scenario too, like Siege Tabor is covered, and if it's towards the beginning of the game where the Fremen probably just naturally have their forces there from the start. I mean, maybe the Fremen are a more favorable ally because they already have one locked down, and and together you guys only have to get 3 more, right? So you kind of already have some locked down, which totally helps.
And the Fremen, they could do we're going to spawn right here and we can move in 15 forces right there. The Emperor is taking on these other two locations. He may have already been in his ancestral homeland here of Habania, turn one, put 10 forces down. So he's like, great, I'll just bring everybody else and jump right into here, or better yet, right into there. And
Yeah,
so
just
Yeah, you got to make it
block it.
lore accurate.
exactly. So this is a much more aggressive move. This is a good alliance thing because the Fremen are only responsible for one battle. And if they can bring in such a huge force, then there's not a whole lot that whoever here, even the guild bringing in all of their forces, the Fremen in this case, in advanced anyway, they've got the Fedaykin and they've got they're all at full strength. So
Yeah.
the guild is like, unless the guild's doing really well, they're not benefiting from this shipment. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So they're like, yeah, it's going to cost us 15 to get this many forces there, and another 15 to be able to go toe to toe. And then we have weaker leaders on top of all of that. So yeah, and presumably the emperor has hooked the Fremen up with some cards during the bidding phase. So that could be a huge factor right there. That this storm position makes the decision for the emperor. It's like, yeah, we got to do this. This is too good to pass
Yep.
up.
Mike, you were saying something earlier too about going first and trying to, I guess, like evade danger. Did you want to kind of maybe expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I recently played a game where I kind of, through deduction or just kind of assumptions, I assumed that I was actually playing as Fremen. So it's actually funny that I'm currently Fremen. That I had a pretty good feeling that the Harkonnen had a lot of my traders during that game. And I was first to go in Storm Order. So in the previous turn, the Harkonnen had taken advantage of that, and they were really trying to attack me because of that advantage of having multiple of my traders. Um, so going first in Storm Order, I knew I had to do something to try to avoid most likely Harkonnen trying to take advantage of me once again. So I actually spawned in some guys here in the Polar Sink, knowing that nobody could actually fight me there. And then I had, I believe, 2 or 3 guys here in Tuik Siege. And I actually decided, well, I know that somebody's going to come attack me in this location. I'm kind of down on the outs right now because I just got Trader calling me, and I know Harkonnen's gunning for me. So I'm actually going to move my guys out of a stronghold. I know it's going to hurt me, but I know since I'm going first in Storm Order that somebody else will at least be able to contest the game if he does try to go for a win. And also, it makes it slightly less advantageous for the Harkonnen player to come attack me. Now, he still did come attack me in the Pasty Mesa.
Yes.
He was really
He was like,
gunning for me.
I'm ready to not win this round just so that I can chase down Fremen in the wild
Absolutely.
and attack them. So yeah, that was part of his long term strategy, I guess. But
Yeah.
Rats,
But I think,
rats, all of them rats.
yeah. But the one thing, actually, I actually think it prevented him from winning in a future turn because he no longer had guys just in an empty stronghold. He had guys out here in the middle of nowhere, which takes away one of his shipping and movement opportunities to fill that stronghold.
yeah,
I think there is a downside to him coming after me, although he still did call traitor and wipe me out again. So,
yeah,
um,
Yeah, but I mean, I think in this particular instance, though, it's like you're forcing him to make a choice, right? Like you're saying, like,
yes,
listen, if you want to come out of your way and weaken your position to come kill me, it will give you benefits in the short term, but in the long term, other factions are going to take advantage of like you being out of position.
absolutely.
And as time goes on, you will eventually like rebuild your forces. You will eventually get spice. You will get cards. Like so, yeah. No, because I think that's a good point, which is like don't be afraid, especially if you don't have good treachery cards or if you look down, because this will happen with the Freeman too, which is like they'll position a lot of guys over here, and then they'll make a move for 2x. Maybe they'll get in a battle or two, and then it's like they've got 2 or 3 forces there. It's like, well, that's really not enough unless you ally up with Atreides or Bene Gesserit. It's really not enough to kind of keep you there. So sometimes you just got to be like, you know what, I need to get out of here. Like I got to just cut sling load and just move on to bigger and better things and regroup and try to find a new means of recouping and then launching an attack later.
yeah. Without ornithopters, it's too burdensome to try to get back
Yeah.
into Tuix. And so you're like, well, do we waste a turn just getting closer, or you're like, there's some spice I can go after, and so
Yeah.
yeah, it's nice if they can get a hold of one of the cities so that they can easily go, all right, I'm shipping here, and then bloop, I can reinforce there with ornithopters, but yeah,
Right.
it's just not enough, and that's what's kind of funny about this game. Just the nuance of the geography is another kind of a fun factor. With like, all right, what can
Definitely.
the Fremen reach? What can anybody reach? And how critical is it to get yourself into these two locations, even if it's just I need to drop somebody in as a sacrifice so that I can move everybody else over to, one, two. That's too far. So, yeah, I want to go to Minor Erg and get some spice. So I have to fight with this one token, and that's why you don't necessarily want to fight the Harkonnen here with a throwaway battle because they'll just capture one of your leaders. And yeah, so yeah, a lot to think about. That's that's one of the reasons why I like Dune. Certainly, if somebody's looking for reasons to complain, they might say there's too much to think about. How can I possibly win this game? Unless somebody is reminding me, you can just go straight over to here and no one can attack you. Like, oh yeah, I guess I could do that. But
Yeah. The
yeah,
other nice thing that you can do if you are first in maybe not in the best position, whether it's cards or spice or kill leaders or all the above, is kind of pinch other players to prevent wins. If there's other players on the board that are in pretty decent positions and you really can't do much to stop it, other than, bribes or that kind of thing, sometimes it is worth just going after that spice or moving out and forcing other people to take on that burden. That way it just puts you in a slight better position the next turn. Because, they'll probably be able to contest a battle better than what your current situation is. If you have bad cards or, that whatever it may be, or maybe not enough to dial forces, it's okay to be selfish, I think.
it's
I
true.
know in a lot of
It's much easier
a
for
lot,
that first player to shirk responsibility
that's
because
right. Yeah.
they can imagine that everybody else will be forced to stop somebody from winning or going after somebody who needs to be chased down for one reason or another. And yeah, I'm not above using that as well. It's like, well, you know what? Since I have to go first, yeah, I'm just going to fortify my position here, and no movement. Next player, please. And
Yeah.
yeah, I know that unless you want to pay me. If you want to give me some money, I'll think about doing it. If we're making a binding deal. Yuck, yuck. All right. So yeah, I mean, if you're watching this and you have some other insights or anecdotes or questions about Storm Order, how do you feel about this as a fairly unique mechanism? Are there any other games that do? I'm not even sure if that Twilight Imperium retheme of Dune. I don't think they do exactly the same thing. I think it's still slightly different. Rex, I've yet to play it, so I don't know if they changed that because their board is wildly different. So they don't have this big circle, but I suppose they still could do something that represents that. But yeah, I should probably look that up, see if they do that. But yeah, let us know in the comments any other insights about it. I would say that so for me, I use the Storm deck all the time. Even the Fremen are not in the game, but I have a card that one of the Storm cards is use battle wheels, and it's just it tells you to do it that way. Even if the Fremen are in the game, it's like okay, it's battle wheels. So because I like that, I don't like to lose that completely, but it is sometimes just nice to be able to go okay, it moves 5, done, and let's move on to the next phase, and none of this because some people I play with they'll spend 5 minutes making a deal over all right, look here, if you give me 3 spice, I'll dial a 3 and you can dial a 1 or like I was like come on, just make that storm go. I want to know if I'm going first or going last, and whatnot. But yeah, let us know in the comments. Anyone else have any last thoughts that they wanted to share? Pearls of wisdom? No.
No, it's an elegant
I don't think so.
system. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
great. I love the conversation, and I think it's interesting to see what sorts of things people respond to in a Dune. A lot of people enjoy different parts of the game. They play the game in slightly different ways, or they have different focuses, and yeah, or different understandings of like things like the aggressor. What does that mean? Like, no, even somebody I've been playing this with for decades still wants to play that incorrectly, and they don't like it when I say that's not how that works. It's storm order, and
I
whatnot.
came to you. I
Exactly.
attacked you.
You know, you're very aggressive, but you are not the aggressor. Not in this case.
You're
So,
you're more of an instigator rather than an aggressor.
exactly, and there's no
Yeah.
benefits for that. All right. Well, everyone, thanks for watching this video, and hopefully we will see you again soon.